And we're live. It is Tuesday, March the 4th, the year of our Lord, 2025. It is 9:02 a.m., and I apologize for being 2 minutes late, but, the train is running late, and we were therefore late getting on the train, and, it's just one of those things that when you are doing a freaking revolution in morning television, sometimes things are not entirely on time. But look, it is morning in Washington. We're making America great again here in the United States. We've cut off aid to Ukraine. The sun is shining. The birds are chirping. It's going to be a great freaking day. And you are watching Dog Shirt TV. It is a fucking revolution in morning television. And one of the revolutionary features of it, and there are many, is that I can come to you live from a moving train, although we're not moving yet. And one of the other revolutionary features of it is that we can have a co-host in Stockholm that can carry us through the periods in which we are inaudible because of technical stuff as a result of being on a moving train, and a guest who is also in Stockholm, and that I can become instantly irrelevant to this conversation whenever I need to be. And so my instructions to both the estimable Minna Ålander and the estimable Eric Adamson is, if you can't hear me, just talk. And I am content to be marginalized whenever tech makes me. And I am also content with the glares of the people in the cafe car who don't really think that live streaming is an appropriate activity for, a grown adult in a dog shirt on a train. So Minna, why don't you introduce our guest?
Yeah, welcome. And sorry, I just got irritated because I noticed that I have something between my teeth, but just ignore it. So Eric, welcome to Dog Shirt TV.
Exactly nobody noticed it until you pointed it out.
Yeah, anyways, enjoy checking or watching my teeth then. Eric has recently joined the Free World, or at least the Stockholm Free World Forum, where I'm also a senior fellow, so we're colleagues of sorts. Eric, what's your position exactly again? Analyst and communications manager, right? Yeah, all right. So
Correct.
There must be the communications must be interesting to manage right now.
There is certainly things and no shortage to communicate about.
Yeah,
that's
so
for sure.
we thought that it would be interesting to get your perspectives right now, given everything that happened over the past weekend, not only the disastrous press conference or the live attempt at humiliating President Zelensky by Trump and Vance Friday, and yesterday's announcement that the US is going to halt military aid to Ukraine. So you, as both an American and Swedish citizen, this is a safe space to vent. So I always invite people I know who feel like they need to vent about things to come on to Dog Shirt TV and vent about whatever they need to let out.
That's the perfect format. Thank you for inviting me. And as you note, I'm both a Swede and an American. Grew up in New Jersey, and I've been living in Sweden now for a couple of years. Moved here shortly before Sweden joined NATO, and it's been nonstop fun since then. But I would say that there's sort of two reactions as Sweden and American. And in Sweden, the response has been both very careful, but also outrage. See, the outrage is coming from the Swedish people, what you read in media, what you're reading in online forums over how the Trump administration has treated Zelensky in that press conference, and a sense of betrayal, leaving Ukraine to the hands of the Russians. But there's also a lot of people being very careful, especially from the political side. because what you hear is that America is still an incredibly important partner. Sweden is safer within NATO, even if the security situation in Europe is worse, but that we need to work with the United States to ensure that the US is part of any peacekeeping mission in Ukraine. So the US involvement is incredibly important for Sweden. As an American, well, that's where I am just absolutely outraged and gave a speech at the Nordic Ukraine Forum rally that has been held every Sunday since the Russian full-scale invasion, where I vented a whole lot about what the Trump administration has done, both as a betrayal of Ukraine, a betrayal of Europe, but most and above all, a betrayal of American values and the American people. And it's important to signal as Americans abroad that America is more than any one president, and that American political tradition, democratic traditions, run deeper than any one president and cannot be gotten rid of in a month and a half. I can't believe it's only been a month and a half. It feels a whole lot longer. But that the American people still stand behind Ukraine and will continue to support Ukraine.
I have a question before we go any further, which is, what does an outraged Swede look like?
An outraged Swede?
Yeah, it just seems like that's. I think of Swedes as sort of like the opposite of outraged.
Outrage around Ukraine and the war comes from a very deeply seated belief in the liberal world order and a sense of right and wrong and justice. And that is why Swedish support.
Seriously,
No, but I mean, like, you're right. So I think I'm proving your point of Swedish outrage is still very measured and very trying to take things seriously, even when you really want to explode. You still want to keep it all in. And I think you see it in the political reaction as well of we want to say so much, but we can't because we also understand our geopolitical position and our reliance as a small country that's export dependent.
So when a Swede gets angry, they say something like, "This won't do."
And what about when a Finn gets angry?
But
And what about when a Finn gets angry?
oh, the Finns are they just look the same, but they will just like take some rash action. So there's an important question in the chat, Eric, to you. Where do your allegiances lie as a dual citizen? Like, I actually recently learned that you in school had to pledge allegiance to the flag every day.
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands.
So I hope that
one
you
nation
stay
under
true
God.
to the flag, right?
This is a tough question, especially to go on record. I don't want any future security clearances pulling this up. No, as I said, I'm very much of two minds, and I want to support Sweden as a Swede navigating the security climate and support as a European, but also as an American standing up for democracy in Europe.
I mean, usually this wouldn't even be like a tough question, right? Like, we're living in the weirdest timeline, like where there can be some kind of a conflict between these two. Like, I mean, yeah. So it is maybe like a somewhat unfair question, but I think the American values that the flag represents.
I'll answer it like this then. In the Olympics, when Sweden is playing the United States, I would root for Sweden because America wins so many gold medals anyways. But there is a Swedish-American pole vaulter who has won so many gold medals, grew up in the United States, but has a Swedish mother, like myself, and Sweden loves him. He's like, Sweden has just adopted this pole vaulter because he wins all the time.
He has like
and
really
Sweden has claimed
made
him
a lot of
as his-
records as well, hasn't he?
If you look at the top 10 records for high jumping, he is 9 out of 10 on the list. So just his name.
So when asked
9
about
times.
allegiance,
And
you
when-
answer
Okay, so-
Mondo, basically.
I answer Mondo, and I hope the Swedes accept me as much as
He's the
they accept
perfect
Mondo.
answer.
Okay, so I want to ask you. I want to ask you about the Monday group, which when I was last in Stockholm, you took me to a meeting of this weekly pop-up protest that
Hmm.
happens every Monday, and is was just an incredibly moving thing. I wrote about it at the time on Dog Shirt Daily, and I'm curious whether this Monday it had an anti-American flavor to it. Like, what was the tone of the Monday group vis-a-vis what had happened the previous Friday in Washington?
Yeah. So briefly, a bit of background on this Monday group. They've been meeting every single Monday. Just a small group of volunteers who are in central Stockholm meet every Monday at 12 o'clock, rallying for the support of Ukraine since the full-scale invasion happened. But it has its history and its roots in the 90s when the Baltic states were fighting for their independence. So on the square, front and center, you have representatives of the Baltic embassies holding up the Estonian, Latvian, and Lithuanian flag. And now this is for Ukraine fighting for its independence. So to answer your question, the atmosphere, of course, we had to talk about what happened Friday at the White House between Trump and Zelensky, and there was a very palpable sense of outrage that Trump and Vance set Zelensky up and treated him absolutely terribly as a guest in the country. Um, and so they were a sense of people were indignant and a lot of applause about the direction that the Trump administration has taken and betraying the values that Sweden stands for as a democratic nation, that and then America as well. So people were pissed. People were pissed.
Yeah. I find it pretty interesting. Like, what's your sense of the coverage, like, let's say in Swedish media? So, of course, like politicians are like European politicians are in a really tough corner here because like they can't, especially in Finland and Sweden. I mean, like they have all my sympathy because they can't just like go out and say like, okay, NATO is dead or something like that, because like they have to sort of like keep up the the narrative and the hope that it's not the case. But what's your sense of sort of like the media and like public discourse in Sweden? Like, what's the take there? Like, I know that Finns and like the Finnish media discussion is like quite far from the official political statements. So,
Mm. Mm. Oh, Swedish media always focuses a lot on the United States and American politics, and I think they almost cover the US a whole lot more and in more detail than what much of the American media landscape does as well. But we have it from a very international perspective. So if the US is looking at the things happening domestically, we of course look at how this is impacting NATO and Europe. I think the media has an understanding of where the politicians are coming from, and there was an article in Svenska Dagbladet that politicians just don't have the political capital that people online and people outside of politics have at the moment because they recognize, um,
mm,
like you say, Minna, we just don't have much room for maneuver to say to throw any sort of doubt behind NATO. Um, but there people are very vocal and very worried about the what's happening in the United States, and that have just gotten to NATO and it's been a year, and then well is we're late to the party, as you like to say a lot. Um,
So I have a
I think this.
question. Is is there serious discussion? I mean, people forget this about Sweden, but it is an industrial powerhouse. And is there serious discussion of the kind of increase in the defense industrial base that would be necessary how how serious is the talk about what Sweden needs to do and what other countries need to do to make this manageable?
Yeah. So Sweden makes its own airplanes, makes its own submarines, it makes its own mobile artillery systems.
It's really good airplanes that are supposed to have really good application to the war in Ukraine, the Griffin.
Yeah, and so there has been discussion that's not on the table anymore about sending the airplanes to Ukraine, but we sent a lot of military material down there. So there is almost unanimous consent that Sweden needs to increase its defense spending and increase its defense industrial base. Everyone realizes that this is going to be an incredibly expensive endeavor and it's going to cost a lot of money. So money isn't really the issue, though. It is more increasing production capacity, access to the raw materials, and the time that this is going to take. It takes,
I gotta add to this that the development of the European defense company stocks, because like it's so funny. I just literally had this conversation today with a couple of American acquaintances that they were like, damn, I wish I had invested in like Rheinmetall and like European companies like a couple months ago. And I was like, what? Like you all didn't like invest in European defense stocks 3 years ago, the latest? Like, come on, like why on earth did you do that? Like,
yes, the U.S. stock market tanked yesterday, but the European defense stocks
yeah, and in case like the Americans here who are listening and watching don't know this, the EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen just announced today a pretty big defense support package. So she said that the EU can mobilize up to 800 billion euros for defense investment, and there will be an immediate like 150 billion defense investment fund, and also the clauses for like national defense spending if they are going against the EU's fiscal rules are sort of loosened now. So this is pretty big, and this in combination to whatever Trump was saying yesterday on TV when the stocks came crashing down, has sort of like contributed to this boost that the European stocks are right now experiencing. So usually I would never say like I recommend to take investment advice from me, but like if you didn't already invest in European defense stocks like years ago, like the latest in March 2022.
People are talking about this, like asking for investment advice, like what stocks, what like ETFs are there that explicitly support European democracy and European defense? Like I want to invest in this. So even at the grassroots level, and day traders are looking to support European defense.
Yeah. So this is upcoming, and I think that there will be a lot of investment in European satellite capability as well in the coming years. So something to watch as well. Who knows? Maybe I'll become an investment advisor if this
do you have
checks out.
Yeah, do you have specific pro-democracy, pro-European defense capacity stock tips?
Are we legally allowed
maybe
to give
we should like pivot away from this topic.
No, I think we should give irresponsible investment advice and create a bubble that then pops and destroys our listener base's financial well-being. Because that's what we would do if we were Trumpists.
Well, I have to say that like I found it very amusing, and I was greatly enjoying like seeing the dismay with which the Trumpers seem to be receiving the news that the EU is actually stepping up and Europeans are actually gonna do this. Like they're actually gonna like keep supporting Ukraine and are figuring out how best to do it. I recently wrote on my Substack that like one should never drink one's own Kool-Aid, and I feel like there has been a really strong sort of anti-European bias. Like obviously this is their whole shtick, but also like in a wider American analytic community. Granted, it's also partially true for the European analytic community that we haven't given ourselves much credit either. But I think that this is an important lesson that it seems to me that a lot of people, like both MAGA but also other Americans, have not sort of seriously considered that the EU might actually rise to the occasion. So I feel like this is a very important.
What's an example of that in MAGA?
I think it was Rick Grenell who posted something about the U.S. wanting peace.
And then foot picks people.
Yeah, so like the EU, the U.S. wanting peace, and the EU just like doubling down and like investing in the war and stuff. So, yeah.
I think the U.S. has really overestimated its agency and underestimated the agency
And
that
Ukraine
Europe
as
has as well. But Europeans have also, in Ukraine, yeah. And if the Trump administration thinks that they're going to strike a deal over the heads of Ukraine and Europe, I think they got another thing coming. And Europe has also underestimated its own agency, and I think we're waking up to that fact that we have a lot of power here to set the future course for the democratic world.
Yeah. Am I still on? Like my computer tells me that I've disconnected.
Did we lose Minna?
I thought you lost me, but we may have also lost Minna.
Am I back?
So, yeah, I'm flitting in and out, so you'll have
I think we
to pardon
are
me.
losing Ben. But am I back now?
One question that I have.
Sure.
Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Ben. Your question. Yeah.
One thing that I'm interested in is, there's the increased defense industrial base question, which is a long-term question or a medium-term question. But there's also if the United States is seriously cutting off aid, who's going to provide weapons, artillery shells in the immediate term? And that's the question that I'm really concerned about with respect to Europe. Is it clear that there is a short-term capacity for weapons provision?
And so I think the question is the short-term capacity on sending weapons to Ukraine, making up for the U.S. pausing at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the multi-billion-dollar question, how this is going to happen. Yeah. Still have American habits. Multi-billion euro question. Just using the Swedish example, the armed forces have 3 tasks, and you can only really pick 2 to do well. You have to increase your own national defense. You have to contribute to NATO's defense planning, and you have to support Ukraine by sending your military equipment. And somewhere you have to make a choice. It's a political choice. It's not a choice that the armed forces can make themselves. And they also weren't entirely happy with some of the political choices that were made, because much of their equipment was sent down to Ukraine. The right decision to do, but it hurts the Swedish armed forces' own capabilities and capacity for the defense of Swedish territory and within NATO. So these are tough decisions. How much more of what you have in stock is going to be sent down to Ukraine, because you're not going to be able to produce enough quickly enough. So you have to work with what you have. But I was having an interesting conversation with someone in the Air Force, and I asked him, if you were the supreme commander of the Swedish Armed Forces for the day, what would you do? And he said, I wouldn't spend any more money or make any more equipment, nothing like that. This is decades down the line. What I would do is change how we speak about defense in Europe and increasing the population's will to defend, because that is the most important step that can be taken now, changing the mindset around the threats that Europe is facing.
Yeah, I mean, like I've been saying this a lot lately that we in Europe need to give ourselves the credit, like both figuratively and literally, to sort of like make the right political choices. It's literally just like there's no reason why Europe shouldn't be able to do this. And the only reason for Europe to fail at this and to fail Ukraine would be that we don't believe that it's possible. So that's a really important point. And of course, like, I mean, military buildup is a very expensive and slow business. But I think that like once it really comes down to existential questions, the survival instinct kicks in. I have some hope that like European countries will figure it out also in the short term. What I think that is important is that European countries have really invested in ammunition production recently over the past years. And this has been done to a large extent, like on the one hand, because like Ukraine has needed a lot of ammunition, especially artillery ammunition, and then also to increase their own stockpiles. So I think that as far as I know, is sort of in an okay situation. And then, for example, drones, there's like grassroots developments there as well. Like, I think I've mentioned this before, but I find it very interesting that, for example, in Estonia, this new startup developed a cheaper and smaller anti-drone missile that they are now testing in Ukraine. And the Finnish company, in a joint venture, is now starting to produce drones specifically for Ukrainian short-term needs, but also to sort of like kickstart industrial-scale drone production in Europe. So these things are happening, and I think that like a very smart thing to do for the EU and European governments, independently of the EU, would be to throw some money at like any kind of like innovative startups that are developing this kind of kit that Ukraine needs like now, like next week and so on, that can be produced sort of like semi cheaply and so on. So these are some things that like are happening and need to be sort of scaled up. Obviously, all the like more expensive equipment is like a different thing, and there's of course a big question also because so many European countries use American equipment. Like, what's happening with that? And like, is America still a reliable supplier? I can't imagine that American defense companies are particularly happy about even this question being raised. So yeah, this is one thing. But I would also like to highlight things that like.
But this is actually a very important pressure point. I mean, you know, if U.S. defense companies start losing contracts with European defense contractors, that is actually an export problem for the United States, and you know that's a lobby that has real power in this country.
Yeah, unless America wants to start selling to Russia now. I mean, who the fuck knows? Sorry for my French, but I think that there's also some other interesting things that that the EU is working on together with Ukraine and Moldova. So, for example, one very important thing is that these two countries are being integrated into the European electricity network and market. So they've been like connected to Russia until now. So this is one very important sort of like integration process that is an important step towards the EU membership for both, but also just generally to reduce those vulnerabilities. So there's a lot going on there, and I think that people don't generally pay a lot of attention to all these like technical processes that are ongoing as part of, for example, Ukraine's EU integration process. But actually, so one really encouraging sign was that the Commission President, EU Commission President, said that actually, if Ukraine is able to keep up this pace, which has been really impressive given that the country is at war. So if Ukraine can keep up the reforms at the same pace as until now, like the accession could happen even before 2030, and that would be like a fairly fast process in that sense then. Given that it is a very tough process, like there's a lot of sort of adaptation demand when Ukraine has to adapt the whole sort of like EU legal framework. So yeah, there's all these things happening, and that's like something I think that many people have underestimated, like how important this EU integration process is in terms of European commitment to Ukraine. That once you have decided that this country will join the club, Ukraine has sort of like in a completely different way than 3 years ago become a central part of Europe, and in the sort of European imagination of what Europe is, Ukraine is now an important part of it, and there is consensus in Europe now. And it sounds incredibly stupid because like this has been a fact for much longer than 3 years, but still like politically and in terms of sort of like perception, it's still pretty big that this has happened over the past 3 years, that Europeans now really consider, oh hi, now really consider Ukraine to be a very central part of like wider European security. That this is like an issue that needs to be solved, because otherwise all hell is loose, and this will affect all of Europe. So, and I give credit to this to a great extent also to Ukraine itself and Ukrainian Stratcom, because they have been really good at sort of like making this point and driving it home to European politicians and societies and so on. So this is, in my opinion, one of the biggest changes that has happened over the past 3 years of this horrible war. That Europeans have really started seeing Ukraine as part of Europe, and that this is like literally all our problem. And that also partially explains why the reactions have been so incredibly strong against this attempt at selling out Ukraine.
So I'm interested from both of you with respect to your impressions of Nordic societies generally. How able are people to distinguish
really
the policies of the Trump administration?
Did you catch that, Eric?
Sorry.
No,
Impressions of something, yeah. Ben, are you able to write the question in the chat? We were not able to make out that. Thanks.
The chat is also saying come to the
completely out. Our impressions of what would Ben want our impressions of? Well, now he's back, so we can give him a chance before I do my own interpretation.
It's a lot of freedom, a lot of power to talk about whatever we want.
But all right, Ben, do you want to give it another shot, or should I just like put words into your mouth?
Give impressions.
Can you hear me now?
No, we don't hear you at all.
Look at the chat.
Well, in that case, but there is an oh, here we go. There he wrote it. So, do people or are people in Europe able to distinguish the policies of the Trump administration from the attitudes of Americans more broadly? I would say yes. I mean, there is a little bit of issue here, and that is that it's a fool me twice situation. So this is Trump's second term in office. So there is like some exasperation with the fact that Americans knew who he is and voted for him again. However, I personally enjoyed greatly all the footage from Vermont over the weekend when people were protesting quite actively against the vice president's skiing trip there. So seeing this kind of things, like regular Americans just like doing whatever they can to protest against this, that's very reassuring for Europeans to know that Americans don't actually condone this and that like there are limits to this. So I think that there definitely is a difference. I wouldn't recommend like traveling to Europe with a MAGA hat. That would not go down well, I believe. And I think that one thing, like when Americans now sort of travel to Europe, have to kind of just expect is that people will ask a lot of questions about the president. but I wouldn't say that. I think that Europeans are very like sort of like the Americans are very welcome in Europe, because like Europeans have a lot of sort of compassion also for all the Americans who didn't vote for Trump and are now also suffering from all the havoc that he's wreaking domestically. I don't know. Do you disagree, Eric?
Yeah, no, I agree. And like Europe is saturated with American movies and video games and American culture, Sweden especially. But I think you almost hear a sort of discourse which you used to hear about Russia, where you would distinguish between the Russian regime and the Russian people, with the key difference being that America has 250 years of democracy, and you cannot compare the citizenry of the US to
Yeah,
Russia.
and yeah.
If there was a lot of wishful thinking around what the Russian population would do, which is obviously not materialized, but what you do see happening in materializing with the U.S., which is why all these videos that are coming out about the JD Vance skis in jeans, Europeans see this as well and see that America is more
Yeah,
than just
exactly.
one
So I
person
think
in
that
the
it's
White
like
House.
really encouraging and really sort of like a huge relief even to Europeans to see that Americans are protesting against this. So I've been personally really happy to see on social media that there's been pro-Ukraine rallies as a response to last weekend. And I'm hoping that maybe Americans will take this opportunity to like donate to Ukrainian fundraisers now that Trump announced that U.S. military aid is going to be halted. So that will be a very good way to express your oh damn.
I think in Ukrainians see it too, and I've seen
Sorry, Eric, you're
some
partially on your own.
posts like
Somebody just started drilling in the house.
okay. Uh, Ukrainians see I work with the Ukrainian community here in Stockholm as well through the Nordic Ukraine Forum. We have discussions all the time about this, that they also see what's happening in the US and the American people's reaction. And I think they're surprised. I was surprised how much the American people reacted to what's happening and Trump's stance on Ukraine. I thought the American public broadly had lost interest, but to see protests being organized all around the country, I was really positively surprised to see people rally to Ukraine's cause and that they do care. And I think one of my favorite posts from someone in Ukraine was, "Do suburban wine moms know that they're my only hope? I want to be one day when this war is over. Please let them know." So they understand that the individual Americans are the ones where, well, the future of American democracy is going to be hanging in the balance of the American people, which is a good thing, but also a very scary thing to have that as your last hope, that a superpower that you are entirely reliant on, and the administration has betrayed you, that your hope is in the populace to save your own nation and to save American democracy and its support to Ukraine. So it's a very precarious situation.
So there's some extremely loud drilling going on every once in a while in the background. Sorry for this, Eric. Like, you really didn't catch a great day.
Oh, it's the perfect time to just speak my mind and
Okay,
vent
so the chat
when it's just
informs
me
me
on the
that they can
show.
still hear me despite the drilling. Okay. Okay,
Yeah, we
great.
hear you
Well, then
perfectly
I
fine.
won't mute myself. I was just like, um, Eric, you can actually also contribute to this. I was just like sending links to the chat about Ukrainian fundraisers that people could support if they have a spare dollar. And Ben
Yeah,
asks,
sure.
what are Euros thinking about the strategy for waiting out the Trump era? I don't think that anybody thinks that this is a Trump era problem that can be waited out. Like, as I said, it's a fool us twice
So
situation.
how would you
It's very
characterize
clear
the
now
problem?
to everybody in Europe that that America's commitments are, in the best case, like credible only for 4 years at a time, and nobody can build some kind of a long-term strategy based on that. So I believe that there will be a long-term decoupling. So Europeans will actually make sure that they don't depend on the US on anything. Like, we will be more than happy to resume the very good and close relationship that we used to have. We will be very happy to cooperate on not only defense but trade and whatever, like everything that's like that could be potentially on the table again in the future. But I don't think that anybody believes that there's any going back to what the situation used to be.
Absolutely.
So there was already all this like analysis that Joe Biden was the last truly transatlantic president, and that was about it.
Absolutely. It's a two-track system where you're trying to maintain as good relations with the United States as you possibly can, but also making sure that you're in a position to go it alone if you have to.
So
Exactly.
it's basically treating the United States.
Yeah, the damage to the Transatlantic Alliance in that sense has been done. That the trust that someone like Trump or carrying similar politics will come back.
Yeah, like coming back to the question
twice.
about sort of like differentiating between this administration and like whatever Trump is doing, and then whether that really represents what the American people want. There is this issue, like if it had been that one time and Americans had been like, okay, no way, we're gonna vote for this guy again. But there is this issue that people basically, like, Trump has not tried to hide any of his agenda in any way. He has been very upfront about everything. And people sort of like, nevertheless, let this happen. I mean, like, to me, one of the most inexplicable questions is this phenomenon that some like far left Americans just didn't vote at all because they didn't want to vote for Kamala Harris for not being like tough enough on Israel and like not supportive enough of Gaza and Palestinians, and thereby sort of like contributing to and enabling Trump's second term. So I think that there is this certain kind of uneasiness in Europe and this concern, like to what extent Americans still share our values. But as I said earlier, and like we both agreed, Eric and I, that that Europeans are very willing to give Americans the benefit of the doubt, and we know that like actually Trump didn't like not every American voted for him and so on. But this fundamental instability about American politics has gotten to a point that it's like impossible to ignore. But I don't know, like, what would you recommend, like, from your perspective, Eric? Like, what would you say, like, would be a smart strategy for Europeans to sort of like try to sort of keep up whatever connections we can while also sort of like taking the necessary measures to also sort of signal that this is not okay?
Yeah, I think we're finally doing the right thing. It could have happened after or during Trump won. But then we had 4 years of Biden, and many Europeans thought that everything was just going back to normal. And now we have Trump too. So we've lost many, many years hoping that the Transatlantic Alliance would just continue as it was. So if there's one thing to thank the Trump administration for in one way, it's giving Europeans a kick to do more for its own security and to wake up and understand that we do have agency here and we can shape our own future together. It was a very comfortable situation for Europeans to rely on the American security guarantee, but it was also a very comfortable situation for the United States as well. It was absolutely in the U.S. interest to maintain a presence in Europe and have such strong
Especially
relations.
because the presence in Europe also enabled global operations, especially in the Middle East. So,
yeah, and I think all Europeans hope that can continue, but it's just going to be incredibly different. And we can set terms now too. Europe can push back in a whole different way against the U.S. than what the United States is
By the way, Eric,
used
there's a
to,
question in
perhaps.
the chat about Jeffrey Sachs's presentation to the EU Parliament. Did you see that one? I have to admit that I missed it. Perhaps happily.
No.
So unfortunately, neither of us can comment on that one.
But there's a question on Canada. Where's
So
Canada's leadership
unfortunately,
here?
our Canadian or Canadian members of what I like to call Europe Plus. So this is like the wider group of U.S. allies that have now teamed up to figure out like what the hell to do. So they weren't able to join us, which is regrettable, but we're hoping to get some of their perspectives. And I was actually thinking the other day that back in the Second World War, there was a very influential Canadian, Lord Beaverbrook. I'm pretty sure that he was originally Canadian, wasn't he? Eric, do you remember this story? Who was then the minister of the air production?
Yeah,
Yeah,
he was working for the British.
and he was like a
Yeah.
very intriguing character, but he ramped up the production of airplanes in the UK like beyond belief right before the Battle of Britain. So I was thinking that like, I mean, that kind of Canadian contribution would be very welcome also this time around.
Yeah, and Canada's an Arctic state, so we have common Nordic Arctic interests with Canada as
Yeah,
well.
totally. So I think that it's been really good to see that Canada has been tagging along these European meetings. Trudeau was in Kyiv on the anniversary of Russia's war and everything. So I think that this is really important for both Europe and Canada, that we sort of like are very closely coordinated.
It's come to my attention that the question about Canada was a joke, but I mean, we're really trying to maintain the transatlantic
No, I'm
link and have
taking this very
friends
seriously.
where
This
we
is
can
not a
find
joke
them.
to me. I think Canada is important in my Europe Plus.
Yes.
Here's a link also to the Jeffrey Sachs presentation, just in case we want to do that to ourselves later on. So Ben seems to be completely out, and we have.
Yes, he left it up to you
All
to
right.
close out at the top of the hour.
But so this is a very unfair question, Eric, because like nobody knows what's happening. But what's your take? What the situation will be like tomorrow?
Tomorrow? Oh, Trump has this big address to Congress tonight, right? I think we won't find out anything new or nothing that we weren't suspecting could happen. Even if it is some strategic partnership with Russia or some sort of deal like that. I mean, Tuberville was on the news just yesterday saying that Russia and the United States are going to make a deal about Ukraine. So they're saying the quiet part out loud, and I found it quite amusing that Elon Musk just before that was defending himself, saying he wasn't a Nazi because he hadn't invaded Poland yet, and then the next day we're talking about a Molotov and Ribbentrop Pact dividing up Europe over the heads of Europe. So nothing would surprise
The funny
me.
thing is just that like they're not going to succeed at any of this. Like they can try, but it's not going to happen. Not this time around. But I have to say that it's like so this.
And why do you think that?
Oh, that the U.S. and Russia just can't divide up Europe. Like that's just not going to work.
Yeah, but like walk us through. I agree with you about that, but it's not obvious to a lot of people, particularly MAGA people, why that is, and why it is that Ukraine and Europe more broadly have a lot more agency in this conversation than than Trump pretends they do. So just spell it out.
So this again comes back to the European integration process. So Europe is so vastly different than it was 80 years ago. It's like completely ludicrous to talk about like Western Europe just like letting Russia take the Baltics or something. Like that's just not going to happen. It will be even like exceedingly difficult to sell out Ukraine. Like Ukraine isn't yet an EU member, but at this point, as I said, it is considered sort of one of us. Maybe not.
It's a
Yeah,
core
like
security
there's also
interest
like a
for
complete
Europe.
self-interest in here, of course, for European countries. But like, so the thing is sort of that the European integration process has interlinked the European countries in a way that it has created what the Germans like to call Schicksalsgemeinschaft, like a community of fate, which means that you sort of have a shared fate, like you depend on each other, and like what happens to one will affect others. Like we all like watch the demise of the German car industry with horror because like it's going to affect us all, you know, like so this is the thing that like the European Union is not like the United States of America. It's not one country, but it is a uniquely integrated continent. And
Especially when it comes to trade and economics. In that sense, the European Union is a superpower and can really, if it wants to, throw its weight around with the United States. No one is hoping for that. But if the United States is going to start a trade war with the EU, this is one of Europe's greatest strengths. And especially when it comes to regulation and regulating tech, hitting Trump and the tech oligarchs where it
yeah,
really hurts,
and that's
the
and then
EU
the
can do
other
that.
thing, like
Yeah, I would just
yeah,
add to that.
yeah,
Can you
we
hear me?
can.
I would just
Yes.
add to that that it's not just the EU, right? So there is the EU, but there is also Canada, which is our largest trading partner, or maybe Mexico is. There is also Mexico. And we are declaring war in an economic sense on all of the above at the same time. And the aggregated economic power of these countries is enormous. Um, and, you know, Peter Navarro is just delusional in his understanding of what the United States can and can't do with the entire rest of the trading world. And, you know, eventually something has to give, and I don't think it's going to be the entire rest of the world.
I would, no, go ahead, Eric.
People, go ahead. Europe and others, if the United States is not going to be a open trading partner, they will look elsewhere. And unfortunately, this might mean
Yeah,
looking
that's
to
a real
China
risk for
as well.
sure.
Uh,
And then like another thing that I wanted to add to sort of like this question, why it won't be possible to just like sort of divide Europe, or like cut Europe sort of into like whatever fits Russian and American interests. The thing is also that you can't sort of like just take one country out of the EU and like or from the European Economic Area, I should say, because that's wider than the EU, and then like sort of like just the rest will just like go on with business as usual as if nothing happened. Like of course it depends a little bit on the size of the country, but basically that is the whole point of the single market, and all the countries that have access to it, that it creates this kind of really on or like you can't really like disentangle this economic sort of, it goes so deep, and it's not only about the economic side, but it's sort of like this deeper sense of belonging to the same thing, being very like-minded and all that. And Ben was right to note that it's of course not only the EU, because the UK actually, like after Brexit and this whole global Britain nice idea, the UK has really come back to Europe, and I think that it's not going to be Starmer isn't going to be able to keep up this idea of like being a bridge between the US and Europe for much longer, I think. I've been really impressed personally about just how angry the Brits are with Americans, or like with Trump and America right now. So
Special
yeah,
relationship.
so special relationship, special anger as well. So I don't think that Starmer can keep up this balancing act for much longer, and like the UK will, like if it comes to that point, which is unfortunately very likely, the UK is also going to have to pick a side. So I think we're not far from that point.
Well, while I can still be heard, I am going to say we are going to leave it there. We're going to end a few minutes early today because if we don't, we may never end because I'm going to get cut off and then it'll be impossible. Folks, we're going to be back for another chaotic show tomorrow. I will also be on a train on the way home. I'm not sure whether it'll be at 8 in the morning or 9 in the morning because I don't really know what time my train is sitting right here. But we're going to figure it out, and I will mention it on the newsletter tonight. Eric Adamson, you're a great Swede. I see the top of a trizub on your shirt. You're a great Ukrainian and you're a great American, being from New Jersey and all. Minna Ålander, you're a great Finn, and we're going to do this again tomorrow. Got no idea who the guests are going to be, but boy, I'm going to need a co-host, because my audio is super irregular. Thank you both for joining
Thank
us
you.
today.
And Ben is a great
Thank
Finn
you.
also. So
Indeed.